Margaret had only recently moved into our neighborhood, but within just a few days, we had developed a good rapport. She was exceptionally kind and sociable, always greeting everyone with a warm smile. Living alone, she often needed help with household chores, especially errands that required going to the market. She would usually call out to me for assistance. I had just finished my college exams and spent most of my time hanging out with friends in the street, so I never hesitated to lend a hand. What puzzled me, though, was that despite the presence of many other young men in the neighborhood, she always signaled only to me. One day, a friend of mine even pointed it out, asking why Margaret never called any of them. I laughed it off, saying, "You guys look like loafers. I'm an educated and respectable young man." Gradually, our friendship deepened. A month had passed since she moved in, and I had taken it upon myself to help her with everything. I made sure to run her errands on time, and she was always appreciative of my efforts. Eventually, we exchanged phone numbers, and whenever she needed something urgently, she would send me a message. Then one night, at exactly 2 a.m., I was startled awake by the sound of a message. Seeing Margaret's name on the screen made me anxious. What could she possibly want at this hour? I quickly replied, "I'm awake. Is everything all right?" There was a long pause before her reply came through, a single emoji with tears in its eyes. Concerned, I asked if she was okay and whether I should bring my mother over to her place. She responded almost immediately, "No, no, don't bring your mother. I was just feeling uneasy, couldn't sleep and didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." Her words made me realize just how lonely she was, perhaps even scared. I asked if I could call her, and to my surprise, she said yes. That night at 2 a.m., we spoke for the first time over the phone. She confided in me, "You see, living alone isn't easy. Sometimes I feel scared, especially at night. Some of the men in the neighborhood look at me in a way that makes me uncomfortable. They all know I'm alone here. It's terrifying to think that someone might try to climb over the wall one day." Hearing this, I felt genuinely sorry for her. It was true, many men in the area were known for their wandering eyes. I assured her, "Don't worry, Margaret. You can always count on me. If anything bothers you, just let me know." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "If you're not too sleepy, would you mind talking to me for a while? It helps me feel less alone." "Of course," I replied. "I'm on vacation from college, so I can stay up late." And so we talked for a long time. Our conversation drifted from small talk to my interests and eventually to movies. Then, quite unexpectedly, Margaret said something that caught me off guard. "Did you know I love watching romantic movies?" she said with a soft chuckle. That night marked the beginning of something I couldn't quite put into words, yet it left me with a lingering sense of intrigue, and perhaps a little unease. Margaret sighed deeply and said, "There's no love in my life, but whenever I see two people in love on screen, it brings me immense joy. I've buried my emotions long ago, but sometimes when I watch a romantic scene, my heart still skips a beat." Her words came out of nowhere, leaving me speechless. I didn't know how to respond. She was a woman in her mid-30s, while I was just a 17 or 18-year-old boy. Conversations like these between us felt somewhat inappropriate, even awkward. Noticing my silence, she asked, "Don't you have a girlfriend?" I burst into laughter and replied, "Girls don't look at guys like me. I study on a scholarship, and my mother works to support us. You already know we have no one else. My mother has sacrificed everything for my future, and whatever little she earns is just enough to get by. That's all our life is. No space for a girlfriend, let alone affording one." She laughed heartily and said, "Not all women are the same. Not everyone wants expensive gifts or luxuries. Some women, like me, only crave a few kind words. If someone could offer me love, I'd give them my everything." Her words startled me. I realized just how lonely she truly was. Cautiously, I asked, "If you don't mind, can I ask you something?" She smiled and replied, "Of course, you can ask me anything. I'll answer happily." Her response made me feel at ease. For a long time, a question had lingered in my mind, but I never had the courage to ask. Why was she alone? Where was her husband or family? But now, with the clock striking 5 in the morning and our conversation flowing effortlessly, I finally gathered the courage to ask, "Where is your husband? Weren't you ever married?" There was a long pause before she answered in a low, somber voice. "No, I was never married. I had an ailing mother who needed care, so I sacrificed my entire life for her. I kept working to support her and never thought about marriage. And now I've reached an age where no one wants to marry me. I'm not wealthy, I live in a rented house, and I earn just enough through online work to survive. Who would want to marry a woman like me? These days, even young, beautiful girls struggle to find a suitable match. My time has passed. I've even started noticing gray strands in my hair." Her words filled me with sadness. I softly said, "You should keep praying. Maybe you'll find a good companion." What she said next, however, shook me to my core. "I've already fallen in love," she whispered, "but I don't have the courage to confess it, because the difference in our ages is something I can't overlook, no matter how much I want to. My prayers can never bridge the gap between us." Shocked, I asked, "Who is it that you love?" There was a long silence before she finally uttered my name. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had disappeared. Margaret had fallen in love with me. I was just a boy, young, penniless, with a life of struggles ahead of me. Our house was steeped in poverty. How could she possibly love someone like me? Sensing my disbelief, she added, "I've fallen in love with your honesty, your sincerity, and your kindness. The way you help me, talk to me. I know how pure your heart is. I don't care about money. All I need is a loving companion." Her words echoed in my ears, but I was too stunned to respond. Margaret took a deep breath, and in that moment, I could sense the fire burning within her. "I just want someone who listens to me, understands me, loves me, and fulfills my every wish," she said softly. Her words echoed in my ears, leaving me speechless. Margaret, too, fell silent for a while. As the call to Fajr prayer resonated through the neighborhood, I hastily said goodbye and hung up the phone. But sleep had completely abandoned me. For the first time in my life, I had heard such words directed at me by a woman. It was a strange, unfamiliar experience, one that sent my heart racing. Standing at the crossroads of youth, I couldn't deny that I, too, had emotions buried within me. Margaret's words stirred long-suppressed desires. That evening, when she called me to run some errands, I found myself dressing up before stepping out. I carefully picked my clothes, combed my hair, and tried to look my best. My mother noticed and asked, "Where are you going all dressed up?" Caught off guard, I replied awkwardly, "Nowhere, just stepping out to the street." I rushed outside and found Margaret waiting for me at her door, a radiant smile on her face. She scanned me from head to toe, her gaze lingering before she handed me a small note with a list of groceries. I quickly ran to fetch the items, and when I returned, she smiled and said, "Come back at 8. I'm making your favorite meal." I was taken aback. It dawned on me. Everything she had asked for was exactly what I loved. She was making meatballs, my absolute favorite. I looked into her eyes and saw something I hadn't noticed before, an undeniable affection. I felt a surge of excitement, a strange thrill, as if spring had arrived in my life. The age difference between us no longer mattered. Margaret's words, her demeanor, and her emotions were youthful, as if she were a 17-year-old girl herself. That night, when I returned home with the food, my mother eyed me suspiciously. "That Margaret is a strange woman," she said, shaking her head. "Of all the boys in the neighborhood, she's chosen you. The women in the neighborhood are talking too. They're wondering why she always calls you for help." I swallowed hard as she continued, "And now she's sending you your favorite meals too? She's an unmarried woman, son. You should keep your distance, or else you'll find yourself in trouble." Her words hit me like a wave of cold water. My mother didn't even know about our late-night phone calls yet. I didn't reply and instead sat down to enjoy the delicious meal Margaret had prepared. It was beyond delicious. It was perfect. Later that night, Margaret called again. Her tone was different this time, softer, more affectionate. Her words revolved entirely around love and emotions. Then she said something that left me stunned. "Can you come over?" I glanced at the clock. It was already 1 a.m. At this hour? How can I? I asked, surprised. She laughed lightly and said, just come through the rooftop. We'll sit and talk for a while. The weather is so romantic. I'll make coffee. I hesitated. Our rooftops were interconnected, and sneaking into her house wouldn't be difficult. But at this late hour? And what if my mother found out? She had already warned me. Margaret was alone in her house, and despite the temptation, I couldn't shake off the sense of unease. My mother's words echoed in my mind. Stay away from her. I found myself at a crossroads between temptation and caution, desire and fear. Margaret's invitation lingered in my mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions I had never felt before. Margaret's preparation always bothered my mother, but I believed that being alone didn't strip her of the right to look beautiful. She had emotions and desires just like anyone else. Yet out of respect for my mother's concerns, I hesitated and told Margaret that I couldn't come over so late at night. But Margaret insisted, her voice soft yet pleading. Come on, just for a little while. We'll sit and talk about love. My heart feels so lonely tonight. I've been lying in bed, restless, unable to sleep. If you come over, I'll rest my head in your lap and finally find some peace. She spun a web of words so intricate that I found myself trapped within it. I peeked outside my room. My mother's door was closed, which meant she was fast asleep. I stood there battling my thoughts, but the allure of spending time with Margaret was too tempting. How could I resist? Quietly, I climbed the stairs, leaping across the rooftops until I reached Margaret's house. She was waiting for me on the terrace, her face lighting up with a radiant smile the moment she saw me. Taking my hand, she led me inside. Under the glow of the dim lights, I was left breathless. She wore a crimson chiffon sari that clung to her like a second skin, her deep red lipstick accentuating her full lips. The blouse was short, its plunging neckline revealing more than it concealed. Large earrings dangled from her ears, and her long hair cascaded down her shoulders. A rich, intoxicating perfume enveloped me, pulling me deeper into her presence. She gently guided me to the bed, her hand lingering on mine. Looking into my eyes, she whispered, Zubair, I'm so lonely. There's no one in my life to make me smile, to love me, to make me feel alive. Sometimes I feel like ending it all. But ever since you came into my life, everything has changed. I think I've fallen in love with you. If I have you by my side, I know we can be happy together. I felt a lump in my throat. I had never been in love, and hearing these words from a woman like Margaret left me speechless. She smiled again and said, I started dressing up only for you. All of this, is for you. I felt a mix of emotions, excitement, confusion, and an undeniable pull. I didn't love her, but I was at an age where emotions had a way of clouding judgment. My desires began to stir, and I couldn't resist. Margaret's gaze was hypnotic, and when she let the end of her sari slip from her shoulder, I was entranced. Drawn to her, I pressed myself against her, feeling the warmth of her body. As the night deepened, I lost myself completely. Her breath was heavy, and I was intoxicated by the heady mix of perfume and passion. Margaret pulled me into her arms, holding me tight against her, and I surrendered to the moment. Right and wrong faded away, drowned in the haze of desire. She would teasingly pull away, only for me to draw her back in, eager to claim what I believed was mine. The night wore on, and before I knew it, it was nearly 5 a.m. As I got up to leave, Margaret smiled and said, Let me change first, then you can go. She walked into the adjacent room to change, and I sat there, still lost in the whirlwind of emotions. Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open, and to my horror, a man entered. A frail-looking yet intimidating figure, around 70 years old but strong. Before I could react, he lunged at me, fists flying. I staggered back, too stunned to defend myself. Fear gripped me. Who was he? Why was he here? What was happening? The night had taken a terrifying turn, and I realized too late that I had walked into something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. I stepped back in shock, trying to defend myself, but before I could react, Margaret emerged from the room. I froze as I saw her. She was no longer the glamorous woman I had met earlier. She now wore a simple blouse and skirt, her hair covered with a scarf, and tears streaming down her face. To my utter disbelief, she ran toward the old man and cried, "Dad, you're finally here! This boy was forcing himself on me. If you hadn't come, he would have ruined me completely. He's been after me for so long, knowing I live alone." I stood there in stunned silence and unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "Margaret, why are you lying?" I stammered. "You invited me here? And who is this man? You told me your parents were no longer alive." The old man glared at me, his face contorted with rage. "I'm Margaret's father," he growled. "I was out of town for a while, and she told me how you've been stalking her, trying to take advantage of her loneliness." "No, she's lying," I pleaded, but he lunged at me again, landing blows that sent me reeling backward. In desperation, I turned to Margaret. "Tell him the truth. Tell him you love me. You invited me here tonight." Margaret, her face now cold and devoid of emotion, shook her head and silently picked up her phone. She held it up to me, showing a video, one that appeared to show me forcing myself on her. My heart sank. The truth was twisted beyond recognition. She had set me up. My world crumbled as her father spoke again, his voice like a death sentence. "You laid hands on my daughter's honor, and now you must pay. Give me 5 million rupees, and I'll forget this ever happened. Otherwise, I'll expose you to the whole neighborhood and file a police report. You'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." Tears welled up in my eyes. I turned to Margaret, searching for any sign of the woman I had trusted, but all I saw was cold calculation. The warmth and love that once radiated from her were gone, replaced by a sinister smirk. "You'll never prove your innocence," she whispered. "My father and I will make sure of it. Get the money or you'll regret ever stepping into my house." The realization of how I had been manipulated hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't have that kind of money," I choked out. Margaret leaned in and said in a chilling voice, "Sell your house. Your mother and you don't need such a big place anyway. You have 2 days. If you fail, everyone will know what happened here tonight." With that, she shoved me out of her house. I stumbled through the rooftops, my body aching from the beating, my mind clouded with despair. When I finally made it home, my mother was standing in the courtyard, her face filled with worry. She had been awake for Fajr prayer and had noticed my absence. Her voice was sharp with concern. "Where have you been all night? I looked everywhere for you. Your room was empty. What were you doing on the rooftop?" I collapsed at her feet, sobbing uncontrollably. I had no choice but to confess everything, every mistake, every wrong decision, and Margaret's blackmailing scheme. Hearing my confession, my mother's face turned pale. Her trembling hands struck me across the face, tears welling in her eyes. "Is this what I raised you for?" she screamed. "To fall for the tricks of a strange woman and ruin both our lives?" Her words cut deep, and I knew that my reckless actions had not only endangered me, but had shattered my mother's trust and jeopardized our entire future. The weight of my sin was unbearable, and I realized too late that I had walked into a trap from which there was no escape. "I warned you last night," my mother's voice trembled with anger. "I told you that Margaret isn't a good woman. When a woman stands at her door, all dressed up like that, she's not considered respectable. I always had my doubts about her, but I never imagined you'd fall into her trap while I was away at work." Her words hit me like a dagger. I lowered my head in shame as she continued. "What will we tell people now? What excuse will we give for you being in her house at such an hour? And if she shows that video to the police, what will happen then?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, Ma. I made a mistake. That video, it makes it look like I was forcing myself on her, but she told me herself to tie her hands and play along. She wanted it, but in the video, it all looks different. Now I'm scared." Mother's eyes filled with tears. "If we sell this house, where will we go? We have no one else. This house is all we have." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "I had dreams for you, son. I wanted you to finish your studies, get a good job, and I could finally leave my work. But now, it looks like I'll have to work until my last breath." Hearing her broken voice, my heart shattered. She was willing to sacrifice our home to protect my honor. We were simple, honest people, easily deceived by someone like Margaret. We both performed our prayers together, and I cried bitterly, repenting for the sin I had committed. Perhaps our prayers were heard because that very afternoon, an old friend of my late father visited us. He often helped my mother with small things and immediately sensed something was wrong. "What's the matter, sister? You look so worried." Overwhelmed with emotion, my mother broke down and told him everything. My mistake, Margaret's trap, and the blackmail. He listened quietly, then said firmly, "I have connections. If your son is innocent, I won't let that woman get away with it." Right then and there, he made a few calls, asking for an investigation into Margaret. Within hours, we learned the shocking truth. Margaret had done this before. She had trapped several young men in the same way, extorting large sums of money from them. But no one had ever reported her to the police, which was why she continued to roam free. My father's friend urged me to file a complaint, and he accompanied me to the police station. An investigation was launched, and soon Margaret and her so-called father were arrested. A few days in custody, and Margaret finally confessed to everything. The video was destroyed, and my dignity was restored. The neighborhood only learned that Margaret was a fraud, preying on young men with her father's help. People came to my mother saying, "You should thank God your son was saved." My mother would nod, offering silent prayers of gratitude. We never told anyone the full story of what Margaret had done to us. Justice had been served, and that was enough. But even now, a year later, I carry the weight of that night. My heart still bleeds with regret, and I often find myself crying in solitude, praying for forgiveness. I want to tell all young men, never fall for the sweet words of a woman like Margaret. Never allow yourself to be alone with someone you barely know. Never give the devil a chance to ruin your life. Zina, fornication, is a sin that offers no peace, only torment. It's been a year, but my soul remains burdened with guilt. I pray day and night for forgiveness, and I ask you all to pray that I find peace.